My girlfriend called me immature for not forgiving her cheating, claiming that every relationship goes through this phase. So, my name is Matt. I'm 23 years old, and this is the first time I've ever written something like this. I'll get straight to the point because that's how everything felt from the beginning of this story. Strange, slightly uncomfortable, like there was always something that didn't quite fit. I met Jenna a year and a half ago. She was 25 at the time, and right from the start I knew she was different from me, not just because of the 2-year age gap, but because of how she had lived her life. Jenna came from a very liberal family, the kind where there aren't too many questions or restrictions. Since she was a teenager, she went out partying, traveled with her girlfriends, slept over at other people's houses without issues, and made decisions without having to explain them to anyone. I was the opposite, not because my parents were strict, but because in my house there were always clear rules. My mom, for example, was never authoritarian, but she was firm on certain things. One sentence of hers stuck with me since I was young. Look, I don't care if you stay out until 4 in the morning at a party. That's fine by me, but don't ask to sleep over somewhere else because that's a no. I will come pick you up, even if it's 4 in the morning. It wasn't about control, it was about safety, so I grew up with that logic, freedom, but with boundaries, and that shapes you over time. Jenna and I met through mutual friends, and at first I was impressed by her confidence. She spoke easily and moved, like she owned the room a little bit. I was quieter, more observant, but there was still chemistry. She seemed interested in me, precisely because of that, or so I thought at the time. She told me she liked that I was calm, that I didn't seem desperate to impress anyone. The relationship moved fast. Within a few months, we were already spending most of our time together. However, even in that early stage, I felt something weird that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't direct distrust, but a constant feeling of being one step behind. She had way more experience in almost everything, not just in relationships. Jenna had traveled more, lived through more situations, and made more important decisions. I had only had one girlfriend before her, a short relationship when I was 19. Jenna, on the other hand, had 5 serious ex-boyfriends, according to her. At first, that didn't bother me. In fact, I kept telling myself it shouldn't matter. Everyone has a past, and hers didn't have to affect me. Jenna didn't talk much about her exes at the beginning either. If the topic came up, she did it generally without names or details, which I appreciated. But there were small situations that, looking back now, act as red flags. For example, when we hung out with her group of friends, Jenna was very physically close with them. Long hugs inside, jokes, comments. I didn't always understand. She was never directly Ostakaushenstein disrespectful, but sometimes I felt like a guest rather than her boyfriend. When I mentioned it once, she took it as a joke, saying, "You're just not used to these kinds of friendships. You need to relax." So I let it go, thinking maybe she was right. On other occasions, she spoke with total naturalness about past experiences, not just about ex-partners, but about sexual situations or impromptu trips. I listened, nodded, and tried not to show discomfort, not because I thought she was doing it to provoke me, but because her way of seeing life was different. There were also practical differences. Jenna would stay over at friends' houses after going out, even living alone. I had internalized that idea of coming home to sleep, not out of fear, but out of a habit. She sometimes made fun of me, saying, "You're such a kid." For that, and I replied that it wasn't childish, just different. "Well, different or immature," she retorted without thinking much. Again, I let it go. During the first year, I tried to adapt, thinking that a relationship also meant learning from the other person. I tried to be more flexible, more open. She, on the other hand, rarely gave an inch when something made me uncomfortable. Her response was usually the same, that I was exaggerating, that I lacked experience, that I needed to grow up. Even so, there were good moments, lots of them. Jenna could be affectionate, attentive, and fun. We planned trips, talked about moving in together someday, which is what makes everything more confusing. Now, a few weeks before everything ended, something clearly changed. Jenna started acting distant. It wasn't a drastic change overnight, but subtle. She took longer to reply to texts, seemed distracted when we were together. Sometimes in the middle of a conversation, she would check her phone and smile in a way I didn't recognize. When I asked if something was wrong, she told me she was tired or stressed from work, and I wanted to believe her. The real problem started with the comparisons. First, it was something light one night. Talking about future plans, she said Tyler was always more decisive with these things. Tyler was her last ex before me. I knew about him, but until that moment, she didn't usually mention him by name. I didn't react. I just asked what she meant. And she replied that Tyler had more initiative, that he knew exactly what he wanted from a young age. Days later, while arguing because I didn't want to go with her to a party, on a weeknight because I had work the next day, she blurted out, "Tyler would never have made a problem over something like this." The comparisons became more frequent, not always explicit, but clear comments about how Tyler knew how to handle certain situations better, how Tyler was more confident, how Tyler understood her lifestyle better. Once, after a mild argument, she said something that still rings in my head: "You just haven't lived enough," and it shows. I didn't know how to respond to that. I stayed silent, and it started making me feel small, like my personality was a defect I had to correct. I wasn't just different anymore. Now I seemed insufficient. I tried to talk about it. I told her those comparisons hurt me and didn't seem fair. Jenna sighed as if I were exhausting her, saying, "I'm not comparing you. I'm just telling you how things are. If hearing the truth bothers you, maybe I'm not the problem." From that moment, the distance became heavier. I felt constantly evaluated, as if I were competing against someone who wasn't even there. By the time everything happened, I was already suspicious. It wasn't sudden or the product of baseless jealousy. It was weeks of accumulating small signs, awkward silences, and phrases that didn't seem casual. The comparisons to Tyler, her recent coldness, that emotional distance. I couldn't explain but felt every time I tried to get close. All of that came together to form an idea. I refused to fully accept infidelity. The word haunted my head. Even though I tried to convince myself I was exaggerating, I wanted to think my insecurities were speaking louder than reality, but something in my gut wouldn't let me rest one night. I invited her to my apartment to watch movies. It was something we did often. Jenna usually fell asleep halfway through the movie, lying on the couch or in my bed. I would cover her with a blanket and end the night in silence. Used to her quiet breathing, and that scene, which until then I found comforting that night, was the same in appearance. We ate something light, put on a movie she had chosen, and as always, 30 or 40 minutes in, she fell asleep. Her phone was on the table, screen down. That was when I made a decision I never thought I would make. I didn't do it with pride or confidence. On the contrary, my hands were shaking. I spent several minutes watching her sleep, telling myself I shouldn't do it, that checking her phone crossed a line, but the unease I had been feeling for weeks weighed more than my principles in that moment. I took the phone and unlocked it. I knew her passcode because she was never jealous about that. I assumed she had nothing to hide. That idea lasted barely seconds. I didn't have to search very hard. The messages were right there. Tyler's name appeared without hiding, without codes, without attempts to disguise it. I opened the Francis conversation with my stomach in knots, feeling like something was closing up inside me. I won't go into details because I don't need them to explain what I felt. They were clearly compromising messages, phrases you don't send to a simple friend, shared memories, insinuations, promises that didn't belong to someone who had a partner. There was even a racy photo sent recently. I felt an immediate mix of nausea, shame, and rage. My eyes filled with tears before I realized it. It wasn't just the content, it was the confirmation that my doubts weren't paranoia. Everything I had felt had a reason. I sat on the bed with the phone still in my hand, trying to breathe without making noise, but I couldn't. The tears started flowing uncontrollably. I don't remember how much the time I spent there, staring at the screen as if waiting a little longer would change what I had already seen. I woke her up. It wasn't a rough or violent gesture. I called her name several times until she opened her eyes, still groggy when she looked at me. She saw my red face and wet eyes. She frowned, confused, asking what's wrong. I showed her the phone without saying anything. My voice wouldn't obey me. Jenna took a couple of seconds to focus her eyes and understand what she was seeing. When she did, she didn't jump up or show surprise. She just sighed. What do these messages mean? I finally managed to say through tears. Her reaction left me cold. She didn't get upset. She didn't get defensive. She didn't try to deny it. She sat up a little, fixed her hair, and spoke with a calmness that I found almost offensive. Babe, I'm sorry, she said, but you know what they say, old habits die hard. I felt like those words punched me in the chest. Tyler is a great guy and he's very good looking, she continued, as if explaining something obvious. I couldn't help it, but I love you. I stared at her, not understanding the normalcy with which she spoke. Confused me more than the content of the confession. Why are you saying it like it's the most normal thing in the world? I asked her. You're a cheater. She let out a small laugh, brief, almost nervous, but she didn't seem ashamed. Calm down, babe, she said. You're exaggerating. These things happen. We just have to get over this together. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her tone wasn't of sincere apology, but of someone minimizing someone else's problem. I got the feeling this wasn't the first time she had said something like this, like there was a learned script in my head. Memories started mixing. Our first kiss, her first I love you, the promises, the future plans, and now this, our first infidelity. Thinking of it that way felt absurd and painful at the same time. We aren't getting over anything, I told her with a broken voice. This is over. She smiled again, this time with an almost condescending look. Babe, let's save ourselves the drama, she replied. It was just a mistake. I promise, it won't happen again. I started crying harder, but not just from sadness. It was pure rage. Rage at her attitude, at the lack of emotional responsibility, at the way she tried to close the prey subject as if it were a minor argument. You really don't understand what you did, do you? I asked her. She shrugged. You know, she said, crossing her arms. I think you're being immature. Every relationship goes through this. That phrase was the final straw. Something inside me broke completely. I stopped crying abruptly, as if my body understood there was nothing left to process. There, get out. I told her, get out of my house. Jenna looked at me for a few seconds, evaluating me. She seemed surprised, but not devastated. She got up without saying much, else took her things calmly and left. She closed the door behind her without saying goodbye. I thought it had all ended that night when Jenna walked out of my apartment with her stuff and shut the door. I stayed alone, sitting on the bed, trying to process what had happened in my mind. I replayed the scene over and over, especially her tone, her tranquility, as if what I had just discovered was barely a minor inconvenience. Still, I convinced myself of something. The relationship was over, and there was no going back. The next day, I tried to live normally. I woke up late, feeling like I hadn't rested at all. My head felt heavy, and my chest tight, as if every breath cost more than usual. I thought about texting her, but I didn't. I repeated to myself that any contact would only drag out something that was already broken. Late in the afternoon, I heard the sound of the door opening. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I stayed still, waiting to hear something else. Then I heard footsteps. I jumped up and walked toward the living room. There was Jenna, walking in like it was nothing, setting her purse on the table, looking around with familiarity for a few seconds. I couldn't say a single word. What are you doing here? Was the first thing I managed to ask. She looked at me naturally, even with a certain impatience. I came to talk, she replied. We can't leave things like this. That was when I realized something that made my blood boil. She had opened the door with a key. I asked her how she got in, and her answer was simple, almost carefree. I have keys. Don't you remember you gave them to me months ago? It was true. I had given them to her at a time when I fully trusted her, but I never thought she would use them after what happened, and much less without warning. I felt that even after betraying me, she continued crossing boundaries as if they didn't exist. I asked her to leave. I told her she had no right to enter my home after what she had done. Jenna sighed as if they were a child throwing a tantrum. Stop exaggerating, she said. This doesn't get fixed by running away. That's when a much more intense argument than the night before began. I repeated that we were done, that There was nothing to talk about, she insisted. I was reacting badly, that I was impulsive, that I was throwing an important relationship overboard in the middle of the exchange. She brought up her ex again. Tyler would have known how to handle this better, she said. He doesn't break down over just anything. That comparison was like gasoline on a fire. I felt a mix of rage and humiliation. I asked her if she didn't realize how cruel it was to keep comparing me to the same person she had cheated on me with. She replied with something I won't forget. It's just that you make a huge drama out of everything. Seriously, you're more dramatic than a girl. It wasn't just the content, but the intention. That phrase didn't seek to argue. It sought to invalidate, to minimize my emotions, to ridicule my pain at that point. I stopped measuring my words. I told her that her problem wasn't my supposed immaturity, but her inability to take responsibility, that she hadn't just cheated on me, but she also expected me to accept it as a proof of maturity. I told her that not all relationships go through infidelity, and that if that was normal for her, then we had never been looking for the same thing. She counterattacked. She said, I would never be ready for an adult relationship, that I lacked experience, that I lived with a naive view of love, that she had been patient with me, but that I was too rigid, too square. We screamed at each other. I won't deny it. We both said harsh things, but while I spoke from pain, she spoke from contempt. Finally, I demanded she give me the keys back. There was a tense silence. Jenna took them out of her purse, left them on the table, and looked at me with a coldness I hadn't seen before. You're going to regret this, she said before leaving. When she closed the door, I knew there was nothing left. That day, with all the clarity I didn't have before I ended the relationship, I blocked her on everything, changed the locks, and asked mutual friends not to talk to me about her. The following days were difficult, not because I doubted my decision, but because the emotional blow was strong. I felt betrayed, replaced, and in a way used. I wondered how many things had happened without me knowing. How many times was I compared in silence? A couple of days later, I saw something that finished confirming what I already suspected. Jenna appeared in photos with Tyler, hugging, smiling on a night out. They looked like just another couple. There were no traces of guilt or grief, or that mistake she talked about. Everything indicated they had resumed, something that never totally ended. Curiously, that didn't destroy me. It hurt, yes, but it also gave me a strange sense of closure, as if finally the story fit together. I thought that's where it would end. But the story still had one more twist. 2 days ago, Jenna posted a long message on Facebook, several stories, screenshots, long texts. She was publicly denouncing Tyler. She accused him of being violent, of having physically assaulted her, of manipulating her emotionally. She spoke of fear, of threats, of a toxic relationship that had scarred her. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't get happy. I didn't feel vindicated either. I felt something much more complex, a mix of sadness, confusion, and distance. I won't say I don't believe her. I know those things happen, but I couldn't help remembering how she talked about him when she was still with me, how she idealized him, how she told me he was better, stronger, more mature. That's when I understood something important. Jenna doesn't confuse love with respect. She confuses love with intensity, with drama, with chaos. For her, a stable relationship is boring, and a destructive relationship is deep. I wasn't immature for not forgiving infidelity. I simply wasn't willing to normalize something that hurt me. Maybe I don't have as many stories as her. Maybe I haven't lived as much. But I know one thing for certain. Growing up doesn't mean accepting just anything. In the name of love, sometimes maturing is exactly the opposite. Knowing when to say enough is enough.